Okay, so learning outcomes. This week you have some different looks at needs assessment and learning outcomes in your readings, or I guess week 7, I believe you have more on learning outcomes. To kind of bring it all together, since there are all sorts of different practices or different formulas for writing learning outcomes, I've created a resource that I've posted under week 7 on writing learning outcomes. So please read through that very carefully and use that to form your writing or your learning outcomes. And I think that you'll have some questions on it. It can be pretty complicated in doing learning outcomes. And so I'll just talk briefly about what I'm looking for, and realizing that we're still going to have our questions and still need to figure some of this stuff out as we go. And that is fine. So with your learning outcomes, the thing that, and I should first say, in your proposals, I thought the learning outcomes that you all wrote were pretty good and pretty focused. The one thing that a lot of them, or the feedback I gave to a lot of you, were that you need to be able to assess learning outcomes. So you need to show that your learners met the learning outcomes by the end of your training. And of course, that's important to show that you met the results, especially when you're working with a client, to improve personally as a trainer and a training designer. And because your learners spent a lot of time at the very least, and possibly a lot of money, and it's very necessary for them to get whatever training you're offering. So you really need to know if they got their money's worth or their time's worth, or are they really prepared to do whatever you trained them on. So for all those reasons, we want to be able to measure learning outcomes. So that's one of the things I want all of you to focus a little more on, is how will you know that somebody understands something? How will you know that they're ready to go over here and communicate interculturally, or that sort of thing? So that resource that I posted under week 7 should give you a pretty clear description, but do ask questions. So what learning outcomes are meant to do is they are meant to describe what a learner will be able to know, to do, or to feel at the end of a training. Now, I don't want to start getting us mixed up around the difference between learning objectives and learning outcomes. Suffice it to say that for your projects, I will want an overarching learning outcome for the whole thing that is usually around 1 sentence. And this is harder and will be slightly more difficult to measure using one method. But for each module of your training, you will also have another learning outcome, or a sub-learning outcome. These will be the pieces that you'll really specifically want to measure. So if I wanted them to know X, I'm testing them on X at the end, and that's how I'll know that they learned it. And that sub-learning outcome feeds into my overarching learning outcome, where they had to know this before they applied this, and on and on. So you need these learning outcomes to be very clear, specific, and measurable. And being clear and specific will allow you to make them measurable. If you can measure something well, you can usually bet that it's pretty clear and specific. So, the way that I'm asking all of you to write your learning outcomes is using the formula, upon completion of this training, learners will be able to, and then I want you to list the performance, which is usually it starts with a verb, and I've included a whole list of different types of verbs that I'd like you to look through and see which represents best what you're trying to see them do, have them do. So performance plus any criteria or any conditions. they can do this under this circumstance. Or they can do this to this level. And again, I realize that those are broad. I have included a few different examples of taking some broader learning outcomes and using the formula to make them more specific. And again, I think in my examples, it's not overly abundant in the overarching learning outcome, how you'll measure them. But it does give us kind of an anchor for the program that we can start developing the modules with their individual learning outcomes that can be measured. So at the end of the day, we'll be able to see things. So I'll just give you one that I had included again in this handout. Oh, let's see, which is the best one? All right, I'll do the first one. So I put a very broad learning outcome of the learners will understand how to communicate in other cultures. It's pretty broad. That doesn't give me a lot of criteria or conditions. So I've made it a little more specific and focused, and I revised it to say, upon completion of this training, learners will be able to identify dialectical communication differences in China and apply these in formal Chinese business environments. Now, this I actually can envision measuring as is. If I say they're going to be able to identify dialectical communication differences, I can observe them doing that in a class exercise. I could give them a test if I wanted to do that. I could have them write an essay to explain the dialectical communication differences. I can have them demonstrate that in a variety of ways. And I said the second part is apply these in formal Chinese business environments. That one's a little trickier, but it's possible. If one way you can do it is to have a simulation and see how they apply it, and if they are able to apply those dialectics in their communication in a Chinese business environment. A better way might be for me as a trainer to set up a formal dinner or a formal meeting with Chinese business persons and have them come in. And you might just have other trainers who are Chinese business people or are experts in Chinese business kind of serve as those actors, so to speak, that you would use for this. I posted 2 examples of final projects in the doc sharing tab. And one of them is a module for, it was a study abroad program. The student was training study abroad students to go to Saudi Arabia. And so her sort of culminating project that she was going to have her learners do is go to a formal dinner with Saudi Arabian people. So they would have to use all the things they'd learned in class in a dinner setting and have to interact with all of these Saudi Arabian people. So that was very experiential. And as sort of the capstone of the class, she, as the instructor, could observe them interacting and applying those things. So just to give you an example, that is how you can measure these learning outcomes. So hopefully that gives you a taste. I think, again, we'll have some more discussion about how best to write these learning outcomes. I'm asking, each of you to kind of critique each other as we're working on these, both in the discussions and in the exercises. So I've asked for a little more focus on feedback in these next couple of weeks. So please take that seriously, and I'll also jump in as we get stuck in certain places, because I know that learning outcomes, they seem simple, but they can get complicated pretty quickly. So I am sensitive to that, and we'll have some discussion. You are always welcome to be in disagreement with how they should be done or why and that sort of thing. So you're welcome to incorporate your own ideas, and we can have discussions about what will work best and why. So This concludes our week 6 and 7 lecture video, and I will have another one for you in week 8, but I look forward to tackling needs assessments and learning outcomes with you in the next couple weeks. Thanks, and I'll see you online.